to the Kvetching Hour. I'm your host, Zack. With me is my co-host, Amanda Karen. And here we hope to make you laugh, hope to make you think, and if you're a Gentile, you may want to consider making a documentary at the next Passover Seder. So Amanda, what are we talking about today?
Before we dive into that, Zach, I'm going to have to stop you. So we got to get the title straight. There's no vowel between k and v. It's Kvetching Hour. Your grandma's kvetching. Your mom's kvetching that you're not dating a Jew. Your grandmother's kvetching that the cholent is not cooked enough. So let's go back to Poland speak.
Well, the diaspora was harder on some of us than others. So maybe just think about that. I know our title. I spell it. There's no way in there, but it's my instinct.
Today we're going to dive into having a revered filmmaker on the podcast. But before we get started, I just wanted to see, Zach, what's your favorite Jewish film, Jewish documentary, Jewish visual capturing of our people?
Well, favorite Jewish film of all time has to go to The Prince of Egypt. It's a classic. Beautiful animation, great music, and really I think captures the spirit of the story even better than the Ten Commandments, which is probably a hot take.
Yeah, scalding hot.
Scalding hot, I don't care. I was a kid when it came out, loved it then, love it to this day. Favorite documentary, hard to think of too many. I don't know if it counts as a Jewish one, but the Tinder Swindler was pretty darn good.
So, Jewish documentary, how?
Turns out he was Israeli. The guy swindling all these beautiful women on Tinder was Israeli, which was rough. I don't want people to watch it now.
That's exceptionally unfortunate, especially because it's not like Israel's having the best PR moment of their lives.
Yep.
So for me, it would have to be, it's not exactly like it's based on truth, but I would have to go with Shtisel. It's just it's a show, it's an Israeli show, pretty modern, and it's like a look that we've never had before, really, into just the Masharim and Yerushalayim communities of what it's like to go to a matchmaker and to date and to be set up, and really understanding the value system. And it's analogous to a lot of dramas that are either not Jewish or secular Jewish, but in ways that people had no access to understanding beforehand. So I have family in adjacent communities. In fact, one of the scenes was filmed in my cousin's house in Emek Rephaim in Yerushalayim. Very exciting there. I know that room well from spending much time there a decade ago, but it's just fascinating, and I love recommending it to Goyim who had no idea that any of that was on this planet Earth.
So let's bring on our guest.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have Saul here, fresh off the interwebs from New York. Saul, welcome.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi. Oh my! First of all, tell us about your background. That is just nerdtastic. I love it.
Yes, my background is nerdtastic. I've got Spielberg and Scorsese over my shoulder here. A bunch of Blu-ray movies.
Blu-ray!
Yes. I believe in physical media. Physical media is not dead. In fact, China just came out with a disc that can hold 200,000 movies on it. And so I believe it's a petabyte of information. So look forward to getting a disc that will have all 200,000 movies you'll ever want to watch on a single disc.
The only problem is I don't have the technology to physically play that anymore.
Well, you'll have to get a player then. I still have a player. I still have the technology to burn discs, which occasionally comes up in my work, occasionally still. These things are not going away, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I dropped my Discman like 7 too many times and it just like, fell apart. Double A battery door threw off and like the little optical thing. Yeah. So it would be nice to get back there. I commend you.
Yeah, maybe I'm showing my age, but I still think that there's a worth to these age again.
So Saul, is that Gen X or millennial?
That's a good question. I'm kind of in the crossover as far as categorizing myself. My older brother, who's 5 years older than me, was born in the late 70s, and he influenced a lot of my cultural
Mm,
preferences when I was a kid. Um, I remember being in like third grade, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was on TV. And I said to myself, "Oh, this is horrible. This is just a ripoff of Voltron." Like I had this like cultural knowledge and an
superiority
elite, yeah,
complex.
exactly. There was like an elitism that already existed
Yeah.
by that point, and like I guess that was part of the beginning of
Yeah.
me just like being obsessed with movies and pop
Yeah.
culture and comic books, all those kinds of things.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about like what you focus on as a filmmaker.
So I like to tell underdog stories. I started doing Jewish related content when I was just about finishing up film school when I went to college. And I did a thesis project as one of my senior thesis projects that was just based on something from my own life, feeling like an outsider in a Brooklyn neighborhood on a Shabbat, um, where I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, one of the flyover states, as they like to call them here.
I've heard of it.
And yeah, there are approximately 60,000 Jews there. It's not a ridiculously small community, but people seem to think it is, especially here in New York. And I never really wanted to tell Jewish stories necessarily, but I felt like too much of a rebel and outsider artist when I would be in religious spaces, and
Mm,
I would feel like too much of a Jew when I'm in like artistic spaces, like at film school. So that thesis project was kind of me trying to reconcile those things. And from that point forward, I started to do more films that had to do with Jewish content, history, media, um, and I kept the kernel of what I wanted to do beneath that also, which was again telling stories of people who didn't really fit in, doing a lot of music related things because music is a big part of my background also.
mm.
Um, and so as my career has gone on, I've kind of brought those things together whenever possible.
Can I just ask what you mean by you felt like too much of a Jew?
Okay, so my background is that my father is from a Reform community, and my mother had Orthodox grandparents, let's put it that way, but her parents rebelled and raised her without any religion.
Oh wow.
And my mom became religious later in life after she started having my siblings and I. And so there was always kind of a back and forth within my home growing up. And so, like, my mom would want to take us to a synagogue on Shabbat. My dad would go to work, but he would try and be home Friday night for a family dinner because he believed in togetherness and things like that. Um, so I didn't really like being in an Orthodox space. I didn't
Mm,
really like being in a completely secular space. I
mhm,
knew that there was something to be taken from both that could inspire me and help me
mm,
grow as a person. So when I got to art school, it was after being in yeshiva for a year in Israel,
mm.
but I didn't like being in yeshiva in Israel, and I also felt like there wasn't enough of a Jewish community. As ironic as it sounds, since I
Yeah.
went to art school in Brooklyn, that I felt like there was no Jewish community around me. It was very lonely
Yeah.
being a person who was trying to keep Jewish things on campus, like having a Shabbat of some nature or
Mm,
keeping kosher at a certain level.
yeah.
I just, yeah, so I always struggled with that. And eventually I started to build more community around it. Eventually there was a Jewish student group that some of my friends founded, and then I helped, promote, and then it started to blossom, and I ended up meeting my wife that way. So,
Mm.
it was kind of like not really finding the thing until it like clicked, and then I felt like, oh, okay, this is me.
Kanohara.
So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that it was hard to find a community of Jews in art school, because it seems like Jews are pretty darn artistic. What do you think drives Jews in general to the arts?
Well, I think that there's always a struggle for finding meaning, especially in Judaism, that we're not willing to just toe the line and accept what people tell us. And throughout history, we've always been pushed into corners. So the people who are pushed into corners are going to be the ones who will find ways to get around it or get through it. And that's the artist mentality. That's what you have to build in your head to be a good artist, is to just find ways of creative thinking, obviously. Um, so, why did Jews end up in Los Angeles and found the film industry as we know it in America? Because they were pushed into it, basically. There were a lot of people who were just trying to find something, end up on the West Coast because expansion in America is heading that way, and find, theaters that they could build because they were coming out of the Yiddish theater movement. And then film is this new medium that they can embrace and kind of find new ways to make money with it. It's not to say that any of the Jewish uh, film heads who started those studios or continued the legacy of those studios were necessarily religious or even moral people in some cases, but they were coming from a Jewish place, and they were finding that they had to get through the persecution and the limitations that were put on Jews time and time again throughout history.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that kind of does lead into my next question. We try to be a funny podcast, but it's no secret that this has been a really difficult time for Jews, just in general. I can't go on Instagram these days without crying a little bit on the inside. Um, how do you think art can help Jews get through some difficult times?
Mm.
Well, that's a big question. I certainly was feeling very lost and upset after October 7th, and I didn't know where to turn. I felt like, as a intersectional person politically, that I was being abandoned by some of the places that I felt welcome previously. And I also had issues with the government of Israel and, just all these things coming together. So one of the things that really helped me, honestly, was that there was a meetup of Jewish filmmakers that happened in the weeks after that here in New York, and it coincided with a major film festival that was going on in town, and there were some what I consider to be some big names in the room. I don't consider myself a big name, but there were some people that I really respect and look up to who were there, and a lot of people that I also didn't know or didn't know their work and got to meet them for the first time. And we all just basically came into a room together of a variety of political stances, people who were very anti-Israel and people who were very pro-Israel, all sitting together. And we just had the commonality of being filmmakers. And we just talked and let people share. And that was so healing. Because for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. And I would hope that other people, whatever your space is, for me, that's filmmaking, that you would find those people and be able to bring those people together to have those conversations, even if they're difficult, and to basically comfort each other through what is, I think, one of the most traumatic times that Jews in our generation have faced.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think you kind of highlighted. It sounds like finding that common ground and kind of being able to have a conversation with someone you disagree with is, yeah, just super important. And I think like the vast majority of people in the world just kind of want, some form of coexistence. Um, and I wish we could kind of start from there and be like, how do we achieve that rather than, just doing a bunch of gotchas and saying, oh, I think you're wrong, and trying to win an argument rather than think about what's stopping a peaceful solution.
Right. Absolutely. And obviously people have different ideas of what coexistence and peace mean to them. I've definitely lost friends over the last many months. I've definitely felt like there are people that I'm afraid to talk to sometimes because I just don't want to go there with them. And sometimes I've seen people who I just feel are straight up ignorant, who don't really have any familiarity with what they're talking about. And as someone who, has been to Israel a number of times and who lived there for a short time, and frankly, who was almost blown up in a bombing during the Second Intifada, I just felt a lot of trauma bubbling up for me.
Um, wow. Wow, really, really sorry to hear that. That sounds very traumatic.
Yeah, but again, as I said earlier, I was in yeshiva in Israel, pre-college, and these things were going on at that time, 20 plus years ago. My first instinct when something like that happened to me was take out my camera, just start photographing, because I always had my camera on me, and it was a way for me to process the pain. And time again, I felt most alive when I'm able to get behind my camera and just take in things, whether it's fiction or documentary. And it's a way for me personally to heal. It's a way for me to personally to process things and have that one step away from my own mind that lets me kind of look at it in a different way.
And I think it's safe to say that a lot of Jews, given our collective traumatic history, turn to humor,
Yes.
not only to address it but to heal from it. And so, what are you finding like when you go to these meetups and in the community? What are Jews talking about? What are we documenting? Is it like food and anxiety, which is certainly mental health, things that we struggle with? Is it like all Holocaust all the time? There's no business like Shoah business.
Right. So
Um,
that's the famous
yeah.
line. But
Mhm.
honestly, look, I've done a lot of Holocaust documentaries. I've worked with a wonderful organization called Names Not Numbers for over a decade, where they hire me and other filmmakers to go into schools and work with students, usually in the 8th or 12th grade, where they'll study a survivor's biography and then they'll sit down and they'll interview that person. And it creates an intergenerational connection that hopefully will last generations more. My feeling is that like it's both limiting and inspiring. Like the fact that I've gotten to interview over 100 Holocaust survivors has taught me so much about history, of Jews, of World War II, of the world at large. And spending time with all of these kids is always going to be hilarious and weird and, just a struggle sometimes because you have to get them to make a movie with you. Sometimes I get asked by students whether there's going to be a blooper reel on the movie that we're making. I have to tell them, very few Holocaust documentaries have blooper reels.
What would a blooper reel even look like in a Holocaust documentary?
Yeah, it would be, the students messing something up or me saying
Yeah.
something that maybe I shouldn't have said. Uh,
Right.
maybe sometimes the survivors, look, survivors are all different kinds of people, just like there are all kinds of people in the world. And some of them are sad and old and lonely, and some of them are vibrant and funny and just full of vigor. And you don't know until you sit down and you start talking to them what kind of person they will be. And it makes a variety of stories, which is so important to capture.
Yeah. So all 100% of my family comes from the Holocaust. In fact, my dad is a Holocaust survivor. And grandma, who is my best friend, survived and wrote a book about Auschwitz. Grandpa had numbers on his arm. And so Zack and I both, like, in our sets, like as stand-up comedians, have controversial Holocaust jokes that get like mixed reactions, needless to say.
I'm
So
sure
yeah.
it depends on the audience.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like fine in San Francisco, a mess in Berkeley.
I can imagine.
Yeah, New York also usually okay. But anyway, yeah, I'd love to start turning to your work. And if you don't mind, I'll start with what I believe is your longest work, Punk Jews.
Yeah,
Um,
Punk Jews is definitely the thing that I'm probably best known for.
yeah.
It exists because my wife and I started going to a thing called Thursday Night Chillent here in New York
Mm,
City, and and it still exists. It's mostly online now. But at the time, it was an in-person gathering of all of the freaks and weirdos, people who didn't have a place, people who are, well, the term became OTD, off the derech, which is basically people who were religious who are getting away from it, and then subsequently people who were becoming more religious or converting who would come through there as well. And I had a short a documentary piece that I had done after traveling the world a little bit called Jiro Trip. And it was basically just a travelogue of places that I went in the Western Mediterranean, trying to find little pockets of Judaism and telling little stories about their history and all that kind of stuff. So I showed this 30-minute thing at Thursday Night Cholent, and there I met Jesse Zookman and Evan Kleinman, who were the creators of Punk Jews, and they had a 5-minute reel of what they had put together at that point. And I came onto the project. We started working on it more. We filmed a bunch of new stories and then created this feature film. And
Yeah.
just to clarify, Punk Jews is a film that is a documentary about people expressing their religion through art and activism. There is a literal hardcore punk band in the film who are Nanach Hasidic Jews, and there are all kinds of stories about the Sukkot mob, who are Yiddish street performers trying to keep Yiddish theater alive. And there's a Yoga Yenta, who's a contortionist that integrates Jewish things into her speech. And there's a story about Cal Holtzler, who at the time was fighting to get more education in Hasidic communities around sexual violence, especially of children.
Mhm.
That's a pretty heavy part of the movie. And there are a bunch more, and it's all online now. The film's fairly old at this point, so you can just go on YouTube, look for Punk Jews. You can watch the whole movie. You can watch bonus stories. There's all kinds of stuff up there. But that became a great calling card for me, and it was a kind of perfect encapsulation of the kind of projects that I wanted to be working on, to tell these stories that don't really fit elsewhere. Who are the Jews that are contemporary and doing something that is just, to me, extraordinary? And
Yeah.
I wasn't seeing enough of that. There's plenty of Holocaust stuff out there, not to deride it, but just I've seen a lot of it, and there is such a thing as Holocaust fatigue. And
Huh.
yeah, and so
Try being in a concentration camp. I bet they had Holocaust fatigue.
Yeah, they
yes,
were
yeah,
getting
there
pretty
you go.
sick of it too, I think.
They were a little bit sick of it. Yeah, they could have done with slightly less. But the point is that I just at this point I know that there are a million stories that could be told out of Judaism's
Mm.
history and present and future, and I want to see that on a screen. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
So, yeah, I definitely, like, we got to dive into this because I actually, watching the film, have some personal ties to your material. Um, I grew up in Rockland, so, near New Square. We knew not to drive through there, through over on Saturday for fear of the health of our vehicles. I went every year to Israeli Day Parade. I remember when Israel was known for the cell phone first coming out. We went with like these big cardboard cell phones and felt really cool and like tacky. But most importantly, Saul, I have to ask you how the heck you got a third grade photo from Reuben Gittleman, which is my alma mater. I had Mrs. Grossman. I took pictures in that library. That wasn't my class. It was a few years older than me. But what's going on?
I where in the film does this photo appear?
Oh,
Because it's
it's in
not
the beginning when
okay.
you're asking, like, what's a Jew? Is it people who eat bagels, light menorahs, go to Hebrew school?
Okay.
And then that was the picture.
So that must have been an Evan Kleinman thing, the producer that I worked
Okay.
with. Yeah, he's from Nyack, and I'm sure
Me too.
that he must have incorporated that literally out of his own class picture. That would be my assumption.
Gosh. Okay, he and I have to play Jew geography. Got it.
Awesome.
Yeah, amazing. We had our sixth grade sleepover in that library, and I know it well.
Okay.
Um, so we need to chat. But yeah, you mentioned Cholent, and you mentioned a band. There was a metal band, Baruch Hashem, Oy Oy
They're
Oy,
called Mashiach Oy. Yes.
Mashiach Oy. Okay.
Yes.
Oh
Very
no, but
catchy.
he was moshing to Baruch Hashem, Oy Oy Oy,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, that's one of their songs, Baruch Hashem.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's
Um,
it's awesome. Like it's everything that I wanted when I was growing up, being in an alternative punkish kind of band myself. And I I didn't know that you could do that basically. Because like I was in a band where I loved the people I was with as bandmates. I loved the music we were making. But when there was a Friday night gig, I wasn't going. So
oh.
there were other drummers who would fill in for me. And
Mm,
and so we had kind of a revolving drummer thing for a while because of that.
yeah.
So I just had to accept that there were limitations on what I was going to do as far as participating in that. And then seeing Mashiach Oy was like a punch in the face of like, yeah, hell yeah, this is exactly what I want.
So going back to Cholent, like it being sort of underground in a way that you kind of had to know someone. It sounded like, judging from the documentary, right? It's a little bit exclusive.
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't exclusive. Like there were people who were just coming in off the street, but you would need to know someone to the extent of like knowing where it would be on a given week. They would get kicked out of a location and then end up in another place for a little bit, and then get kicked out of that location and end up in another place for a bit. So if you went last year and you're expecting to come back this year, you're not necessarily going to find it. So there is that element to it. But now it's all online. Just, Thursday nights, join their Facebook group, Thursday Night Chillin', and get on a Zoom with all these people because some of them who are my good friends are still doing it, thank God.
Man, where was I when I needed you guys as an
What?
alternative?
No, we freely talk about it. Everyone talks about it. In fact, most people would be told to shut up about it. So to me, that's the Jewish version of it. It's like, the Jewish Fight Club would be, oh, he can't stop talking about it. Leave us alone. Enough with the Fight Club.
Okay.
Lawyers are,
And I was just like shocked by the physical flexibility of the yoga yenta, just like was kvelling hard.
yes, she's amazing. The amazing Amy. As far as
So,
I know, she is still performing.
Kinahara, that is just fantastic. Have you spent time in Israel recently?
I was there almost 6 years ago last time,
Hmm.
so it's been a little
Yeah,
while.
yeah,
But
same.
I'll get back when I can. Um, I did go to Saudi Arabia this year though, which was an interesting experience. Um, I don't know if I let the cat out of the bag here, but I went there to work on a film project,
All
specifically
right.
a Jewish documentary.
Wow.
And I'm editing it right now, still in post-production. But I went with a rabbi from Washington, D.C. named Shmuel Hertzfeld, who I had made a previous short doc about called Dedication, and that's currently being pitched around to festivals and things. And the first story was about him just basically deciding one day, I'm going to become a Sofer Stam, that I'm going to write Torah, even though I've never done calligraphy before. He doesn't have a lot of artistic talent necessarily, but he just said he'd do it and he did it. And so that first film's about that. And then he kept writing Torahs for the next number of years. And now he decided he wanted to go to Saudi Arabia to what he believes is the actual site of Mount Sinai and be the first person to write Torah at Mount Sinai since Moses. So we did,
What
yeah,
statement?
yes. So just on that statement alone, whether or not it's actually the place or whether or not it's true, doesn't matter to me. I said, this is a film, I have to do this. We're making a sequel. So I went with him to Saudi Arabia and I was very nervous. I didn't know honestly what to expect on a few levels. Like going there as an American is dangerous. Going there as a Jew is dangerous. And going there bringing a bunch of camera equipment, essentially being a journalist, is also dangerous. But we found a tour organizer who was out of the Midwest, who had done the religious tours of Saudi Arabia, mostly with evangelical Christian groups. And they brought us out, and not to give any spoilers away, but we did it. So, so we came out alive. I didn't lose any of my equipment, thankfully. Uh, our visas were good. And we did have some people who joined us from Israel, which is why I brought it up, which was a kind of a complicated thing that they couldn't come on Israeli passports. They had to come on foreign passports. And
They all have them?
well, the people who joined us on this trip did have foreign passports.
They had to, yeah.
So they went down to Eilat and crossed over the Jordanian border. Apparently, the Jordanian crossing police right there are very, very, very strict. Like if you have a talit or tefillin or anything Jewish on you, they will confiscate it. And if you want to be able to go to Saudi Arabia without that happening, you would actually need to fly from Israel to let's say Dubai, and then from Dubai to Saudi Arabia, which is very out of the way when you could literally just get in a car, cross from Eilat to Jordan, drive 5 hours south, and then you're in the Saudi desert with us in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia, which is what some of the people in our group did. And it was amazing. Like first thing when we arrived, you realize everyone is wearing the same thing. Every single person. The men are wearing the white tobe with the red and white checkered keffiyeh. The women are all dressed head to toe in black with only their eyes and their hands showing. And you just stand out like a sore thumb no matter what you're wearing because you're just not that. So first thing that we did, well, no, but I got a tobe. Our rabbi was like, he went to our local fixer, Mohammed, and he's like, can we go to a men's clothing store? And he's like, sure, of course. So we went to a men's clothing store and got local clothes. And I had a beard at the time, and I fit right in. And so, like, with the tobe and the beard and sandals, no kippah on my head, I fit right in. People spoke to me in Arabic. It was kind of amazing. And I had a special phone that I brought for filming purposes, so I wasn't always lugging around a big camera. And I would just take little, images here and there. And yeah, I mean, hopefully this is not the last interview that I'm able to give on this subject, because my goal is that when the film comes out, that I don't get like basically denounced by the international whatever or by the Saudis, and that we're able to show the movie publicly and have it be a wonderful celebration of cultures coming together, because something like this only exists because the Abraham Accords allowed it to exist. And another point that I really want to make is that my hope is that when this war is the current war is able to actually end, hopefully in a positive light, that we should be able to continue to grow relationships with other countries that are around Israel, because I think that's the way forward, personally.
Yeah, we were, Saudi Arabian relations were about to improve until 7th.
Yeah, as far as I know, we were the only Jewish group that has gone to these Sinai sites.
Okay, so main question there.
Yeah.
Has Chabad made it to Saudi Arabia?
There is a Chabad rabbi who came from Israel to Riyadh.
I knew it.
Wow.
He's all alone there as far as I know, but he helps out local people who visit, usually businessmen who are traveling alone. In our case, he was helpful, helping to coordinate for our food and things. Like Rabbi Herzfeld had a request at one point for matzah, and it was like, where the hell are we going to get matzah in the middle of Saudi Arabia? But it actually just kind of worked out that there was matzah that he had gotten for some business guy who was supposed to come around Passover time, and he didn't end up showing up. And so there was matzah that ended up being there, and we ate matzah in the Saudi desert.
Wow. I mean, I've been to Chabad in Guatemala, China, but Saudi Arabia, that's next level.
Yeah, they don't have a
I feel like
Chabad house. It's illegal. I should make this plain. It's illegal to outwardly be any religion but Islam. So
Mhm.
you can't have a cross necklace. You can't have a Magen David necklace. You can't have a kippah. You need to, you know, you can't wear tefillin or pray in a Jewish way publicly. When we did it, maybe I shouldn't say this that we did it, but we did it privately. We had a private minyan that we were able to have.
So there were 10 of you?
Yeah, we had a group of about 15 people.
Okay, okay.
Did you come across
10.
any anti-Semitism?
Uh, for the most part, we were in the middle of the desert, and for the most part, nobody knew we were Jewish intentionally. But I did have an interesting conversation on an airplane flying from Tabuk to Riyadh, where I was
Mhm.
sitting next to this gentleman and we just started having a conversation. And this was a middle of the night flight, like literally a 2 a.m. flight from an airport that has
Wow.
4 gates, not 4 terminals, 4 gates, and flying back to the capital city. And this guy just wanted to talk. So we talked, and I'm sure he wanted to practice his English or whatever, but we had a great conversation, and I loved talking to him. He invited me to come back to Saudi Arabia and live with his family for a month, like right off the bat. But then at a certain point, he asked me what my religion was. And I told him I was Jewish, and he didn't understand because that's not the Saudi term for a Jew. But then I clarified to him in Arabic, and he then was like, "Oh," and he got kind of solemn. So I don't
Wow.
necessarily think that's anti-Semitism, but
Oh, yeah.
I do feel like the tone changed when that happened. And
Yeah.
what I would like is to be able to have those conversations and for someone to not be disappointed in me when they find out I'm Jewish. And he wouldn't take a picture with me, which maybe is also a cultural thing because they don't necessarily take a lot of photographs of people there.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
that's not really part of their
And then
custom.
he was like, about that month-long
Right. I
invite.
didn't.
When can we see it?
So, as I said, it's in post-production right now. I'm still working on it. I would love to have it finished soon. As soon as a film festival comes to me and says, we want that, I would love to be there. If it's the San
Awesome.
Francisco Jewish Film Festival, I would love to be
Of
there.
course. Yep. Yeah, I've been. It's
And
lovely.
you are going to make a documentary about the San Francisco Jewish scene. Is that correct?
Is that a Bay Area?
Yeah, I have another project which is also in production. It takes a long time to make documentary films. I should just, point that aspect out because Punk Jews is a fairly old project as far as I'm concerned, at least. But I'm still happy to talk about it. But I have other things that I've worked on, and sometimes they just haven't come out yet, and sometimes they're just still in process. And this project in the Bay Area is one of them. So it's called The Grateful Yid, and it's about the original giant menorah that was created, the first one that existed outside the state of Israel. And it was put up in San Francisco in the early 70s, and it was funded and built, physically built, by Bill Graham, who was the founder of the Fillmore and who was a huge name in rock and roll and music in general, big promoter. And so this story is kind of the story of Bill and his Jewish life, focusing on the menorah aspect, a little bit on the fact that he himself was a Holocaust survivor, and then his connection to these early Chabad rabbis who were out in San Francisco. So Rabbi Yosef Langer, who's kind of the big Chabad guy in San Francisco, has been doing this and putting up the menorah every year for God, what is it, 50 years now almost? And he is a amazing person of his own right. He's from the Bay Area originally, hippie at heart, and this is kind of the story of like how rock and roll and Judaism kind of converged in this hippie scene from the late 60s through the 70s.
Wow. Okay. Well, I can't wait for that because,
Thanks.
yeah, the Fillmore, of course, like
Yeah.
one of the centers of film.
Every year they have to take a picture with that giant menorah. Fillmore. Oh, shoot. I was gonna switch gears and ask about the sleeping on a subway video.
Sure.
In term, so it
Yeah.
was.
So
Yeah.
for a number of years, I was writing for a Jewish online magazine, blog, whatever you want to call it, called Hevria. And it was a bunch of my friends and myself who were all Jewish writers coming out with stories and essays and all kinds of other things. And so one of the co-founders of that, Elad Neharai, who was working in media and advertising, came to me for one of his clients and basically had this idea. He's like, there's a photo that had gone viral on Reddit of a Jewish man on the subway who let another person rest his head on his shoulder. And apparently the person had slept on his shoulder for like a half hour, and this Jewish man didn't mind and let him have his rest. And it was a sweet story. And Elad said, I want to make a video that kind of builds on that. So he had like the rough outline of an idea, and he came to me and said, how do I do this? Is it legal to do this? And well, because like you should know, I found this out in the process of putting this project together, that it is legal to film people without their knowledge on the New York City subway, that it's considered a
Whoa!
public place. And so,
Wow!
in trying to put this video together, I I had to basically like hide cameras. I didn't want anyone to know they were being filmed. It's somewhat of a social experiment. And we got an actor who would pretend to fall asleep on people's shoulders, Mayor Kalmanson, who himself has gone on to amazing work as a social media character and a YouTuber and all kinds of other things. And he would fall asleep on people. And we realized quickly that Mayer, with his long beard and long hair, was getting a lot of negative reactions from people. So
Mm.
I took a hat that I was wearing while I was filming it, just like a gray fedora, and I gave it to him and had him wear it, and he suddenly transformed from looking like a person who was unhomed to a person who was just a hipster. And and people,
Fine
yeah,
line.
and people started reacting differently, and we started to get different results. So I'm sitting there with a professional video camera under a coat, sitting opposite Mayor. I have another person who's down the train holding their phone up, just pretending like they're looking at their phone, but actually filming, and another person doing the same in another part of the car. And we took all of that footage and cut it together and created this sort of best of that manipulated you as a viewer into feeling like, oh, it's so sad that people won't let someone rest on their shoulder. But wait, there is hope. And now we're showing all the lovely moments that happened between Mayor and all of these New Yorkers who were so willing to let him rest and have a good time.
Right.
So that video came out. We didn't really know what would happen with it, but within a few days, it hit like 1.5 million views, and it just kind of was everywhere. And Daily Mail in the UK was writing about it, and ABC World News Tonight with Diane Sawyer was featuring it, and all these
Wow.
things just kind of spun off from that. And there was that one moment in my career where, like, off of Punk Jews and Sleeping on Strangers on the subway, I was like kind of popular, and it opened a few doors for me. Uh, and so I was very appreciative to be a part of that project, and I'm happy with the end result. I hope that wherever you watch it, that my name is on the credits, because that was important to me.
Yes.
It was.
Yeah. Made sure.
Well,
Especially with the alliteration. Sleeping on the subway with strangers with Saul
Right,
Sudin.
no, not sleeping with strangers on the subway. That's a different video. You
No,
have to look
no,
for that on a different site.
I was a little surprised that you were able to find so many people that were willing to let someone sleep. I mean, I consider myself a Hufflepuff, so I should be a lot more likely than most people to allow that. But I'm pretty sure if some hairy guy wanted to rest on my shoulder, I would have the courage to be like, "Get off me, buddy."
Yeah, that's fine. You shouldn't think less of yourself because you know that you wouldn't let someone sleep on your shoulder. But it was very interesting to see who did or did not want him to be there. And, you couldn't necessarily predict it. We didn't go into it with a plan like, "Ooh, let's get that person." You just never knew. And that was the documentary aspect of it, which is, maybe why I was the right fit for that.
I don't know, Amanda. Would you let someone sleep on your shoulder?
And with that, I'm gonna move to the next segment. um, Saul, we're super excited to see all your work, both Bay Area, Saudi Arabia, and everything in stealth mode. But I think you'll appreciate our segment Yay or Oy Vey, where we dive into some famous Jews, as you might call big names, which hopefully you will consider yourself someday. But we're just gonna rapid fire list some names, and you just tell us yay or oy vey, whatever that means to
Okay,
you.
I can do that.
Let's start with Nana, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov.
Yay.
Any reason?
I think that putting aside all of the people who insist on going to his grave every Rosh Hashanah in Ukraine, which is a oy vey to me, that Rabbi Nachman himself was a pretty wild punk Jew, and anyone who is going to go outside the norm and try and express Judaism in unique and unconventional ways, I am there for. And
But time out. Why do you frown upon like a yearly pilgrimage?
I think it's a bit much. And it's also like, I don't need to get into all the details, but like people who will no longer stay home to spend Rosh Hashanah with their wife and children, I think there's maybe a problem with that. People who have used it as a way to just get away to the Ukraine and perhaps push some of the boundaries of what is legal, let's say. That's also
Okay.
not such a good thing because there are issues there with drugs, with prostitution, with weapons. Uh, so yeah, it has an upside and it also has a downside.
All right.
Talk about going back to punk Jews here. Yoga Yenta.
Oh, absolutely. Yay. Yeah. The amazing Amy Yoga Yenta. I'm a huge fan of her. I think she's amazing. I love that she's so into science fiction, in addition to all of the other things that she can do. And and
Yes.
having just watched Dune 2, I was thinking about her actually. Just like, oh, I
Oh,
hope she's seen Dune 2. I hope that she's appreciating that this has made it to a big screen. Mm. I'm all for people who are, as I said, expressing Judaism and pushing the boundaries, reaching out to people who would not necessarily have Judaism in their lives and showing them what can be good about Judaism. But there's a lot of politics around him now. Again, as I said, I'm not a fan of sexual violence, and I would hope that there are better legacies to point to than
yeah.
his.
Really,
Yeah,
really hard to separate the artist from the art.
yeah, yeah. And the House of Love and Prayer in San Francisco was a very big tonal shift as far as how Judaism was being treated at that time. A lot of Jewish people were going to the hate and they were just looking to Buddhism or other religions to find their inspiration. And to say that you can find some of that inspiration in Judaism also is something that I do respect. So I'll just say that positive note.
Okay, got it.
Rabbi Shmuley,
Which Rabbi Shmuley?
the one on Pierce Morgan all the time.
Oh, him. Uh,
The trash talker.
you're really gonna push me on these. Why do I have to speak about someone who's alive? I'm Oy Vey. Yeah, I'm not a fan of people who try to align themselves with stardom or celebrity. And
For the sake of
yeah,
that.
I've met him a few times. He's been perfectly nice to me, but yeah, I have limits on that. Like, I'm not a star seeker. That's my personal preference.
Got it.
You need to lay off the personal attacks, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I know. You guys are forcing me to get out there and say some things that maybe I don't want to say, but
All
no, it's
right.
okay. No,
Lena
it's
Dunham.
Lena Dunham. Oh my God. Oy vey.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I was
Fellow New York Jewish filmmaker. Tell me about your stance.
sure. I just didn't like girls as a show. It didn't really speak to me. Um, Same with Tiny Furniture, the film that she made previous to that. I don't know, just as a filmmaker, doesn't speak to me personally. Um, by the time she was telling stories of these, single women struggling in Williamsburg, I was married, and it just didn't speak to me.
How about J.J. Abrams?
That's a yay. Yeah. JJ, I don't necessarily like everything that he does, um, but there's enough of it that I find interesting, and I think that he and I share the fact that we both love Spielberg, and so there's just a certain thing that comes about when you're like trying to be Spielberg. None of us will ever be Spielberg. It's not going to happen. No matter how much or any other person has said to me, "Why can't you be Spielberg?" Uh, it's not going to happen. I'm just not. I have to be me. But J.J. Abrams has the ability to kind of reach into that and be like, I can play with a little bit of Spielberg here or there. I can do Super 8, or I'll even make a Star Wars, or even more than one Star Wars, which the less said about the last one, the better.
Last one, Woody Allen.
It's a yay for me. Yeah, yeah, I know.
Whoa.
Despite everything I said, uh, I know it's still controversial and complicated, but he has made some of what I think to be the best movies of the late 20th century, and certainly the best Jewish films. Purple Rose of Cairo is amazing. Zelig is amazing. Stardust Memories. There's a lot of films that people don't necessarily think of. Like, I'm not going to go straight to Annie Hall in Manhattan. I'm a big fan of a lot of Woody Allen's films, and it did get to a point where I was like, all right, he's still making movies. Do I still want to watch them? And sometimes I would still give them a chance. Some of them were good, some of them weren't. But that was his whole career. He would be hit and miss for decades. And I have the utmost respect for a filmmaker who made a film practically every year of his career for like 50 years. And not only directing them but writing them. Like, that's just astounding to me. As a professional, I can't quite wrap my head around it. And as someone who's had projects that have gotten stuck for years, I just like, oh, I wish I had a new thing to come out with every year. I wish that the thing that I wanted to say with my art every year was able to be out there and be said. Because it's a struggle sometimes to do that. And so, if nothing else, I respect that aspect of Woody Allen.
Great. Well, Saul, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Loved having you.
Yeah, we've can't wait to see more of your work. And where can people find your material and just learn more about you and your work?
So come and visit me at saulsudin.com, or find me on any social media at SM Sudin. That's my first two initials, SM, and my last name, Sudin.
I find that us millennials, which you sort of are, I guess, have that exact like email address. First two initials, last
Yeah,
name.
I have some variations. Actually, I had my full name originally, and then it got hacked a number of years ago, and I had to pivot. So it is what it is.
That's what you get when you're a controversial
Right.
filmmaker.
If you really want to find out how old someone is in our generation, you ask them what was their original screen name and what was their first email address.
Thanks, Saul. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
thank
Saul.
you. Yep, and thank you for everyone listening. We'll see you next time on the Kvetching Hour.
Kvetching. If you're not sneezing, you're not saying it right, Zach.